I'm excited for today's show. It's on visual effects with Adhish Yajnik, who is the technical director at Alpha Studios. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
First, I always like to start off with, how did you get into visual effects, and is that what you started out in?
It's funny you could say it is the thing that I started out in because, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an animator at Disney. And so the earliest kind of forays into moving pictures that I did at all were through animation. I don't know if you know about animated GIFs, but I would go into Microsoft Paint and I would meticulously paint little, literally thumbnail size by today's standards, little images frame by frame by frame. And I would use a little program to make them into animations. And then eventually I kind of even used PowerPoint to create, animations using the little slide and the automatic slide advancement feature in that. And then as I got into middle school and high school, I started making sci-fi films and I started learning programs like 3D Studio Max, After Effects, and things like that. And so even though I went to film school at USC and kind of studied all aspects of kind of on-set and post-production, as I came out of film school, visual effects was kind of a natural kind of career for me to quickly start kind of freelancing and getting jobs in because I had built up a reputation at USC for being able to do that. And so the first clients I had out of school were some of my closest friends.
Oh, wow. How exciting to think about when you started, and it's like being meticulous about the frame by frame by frame. And now the softwares today probably make it so much easier, which leads me into, what are the softwares and tools that a visual effects needs to know?
Yeah, it could really kind of depend on what kind of specialization you have. I think depending on if you're a compositor or a CG artist, it's going to change a little bit. But if you're a compositor, I think the main software out there today is called Nuke. There's also After Effects, which is a compositing platform. There's Fusion. There's a couple of others. But Foundry's software, Nuke, has kind of the biggest market share and is used at the biggest studios. In terms of the CG side of things, Maya is a pretty big one for creating CG, as is 3D Studio Max. Blender is an open source program that's starting to kind of make inroads into the professional community, but it's still kind of seen as a little bit of an outsider. It's kind of the Final Cut Pro to Avid in that sense. And then there's a whole host of kind of like tools on top of that. There's a really powerful program called Houdini that specializes in simulations and kind of procedural effects like fire, pyro, smoke, water, magical phenomena, things like that. And so as you kind of level up your skill in any one kind of specialization, you'll find yourself using, more specialized programs that just kind of do that one thing really, really, really well, and are the best in their field at that one thing. But in terms of the kind of broad field, I think Nuke, Maya, 3D Studio Max are kind of the big ones that you'll see a lot.
Now, does someone that wants to get into visual effects, do you think that they should take courses, go to school, or can you learn these programs like on YouTube or other platforms?
So myself, I'm self-taught. It just kind of requires, and it's kind of hard to develop this, but it requires an ability to discern kind of what the good learning material is from the kind of bunk learning material. And that takes a little bit of vetting. If you see that the people kind of creating that content are working on, high level, Hollywood productions, that knowledge is coming from a good place. There's a lot of paid tutorials these days, paid tutorial series that you can kind of like vet the content before you actually buy it. And there's some really, really great content out there if you want to teach yourself. But I would also advocate if you're the kind of learner that needs to kind of learn in a classroom environment, and especially for just kind of building that network of other artists in that community, going to a visual effects program at a school can be invaluable. The one in Los Angeles that I would recommend is the Gnomon School in Hollywood, GNOMON. They're a feeder for some of the biggest visual effects studios around, so can kind of learn all of the programs that I mentioned and more at that institution.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So what are the primary roles and responsibilities for a visual effects artist in a film production?
So for a visual effects artist, it kind of depends on their kind of level within the kind of visual effects, within the department, essentially. So for an artist kind of working at a studio, they're kind of just a cog in the wheel, and they're kind of executing on the vision of like a lot of people much higher above them. And those kind of directives kind of come down from the visual effects supervisor, who kind of carries all the keys and carries all the knowledge of that visual effects department. So for them, their main responsibility that kind of gets translated down to all of the artists working under them is to essentially just to support the director's vision and enable them to get whatever visuals they need to be able to see to tell their story. And that can be from the biggest landscapes or fantastic creatures down to the most minute, wire paint outs or C-stand removals from a shot. And also kind of balancing that against the kind of technical feasibility, budget requirements, schedule required to create all those VFX. And that kind of translates to different responsibilities in pre-production, production, and post, which I'm sure you'll get into.
Right, yes. Well, and then can you describe your typical workflow and collaboration with the director and the other departments? Like when you get brought on, like we just did a short film together, what are the typical questions that you would ask of the director? And then are you also talking with the editor as well?
Yeah, I typically start off, if I'm brought on in pre-production as a supervisor, I'll start off by reading the script and highlighting any potential VFX that I might see in there, and then having extensive conversations with the director about each and every one of those. What are they seeing in their mind? What do they visualize? If they're thinking kind of small potatoes, my job is to kind of present them with more exciting, visually interesting possibilities to let them know, like, hey, this is also possible. If they're thinking of stuff that's, just not going to look quite right, I can kind of translate that into something that still works for the story. So really, like, I'm coming in as a storyteller, trying to support their vision, and asking them how can we arrive at the same place that way. As far as talking to the editor, the conversations that I have with them are typically of a more technical nature, because I'm asking about things like frame rates and resolutions and codecs and color spaces and things like that. And as visual effects typically kind of comes after picture lock on most shows, most of the work that the editor does kind of just gets sent over to us, and our job is to kind of make sure that the edit that the editor and the director and the producers have decided on will also work with VFX, and to deliver VFX that fits that edit as well and is continuous across all the shots and all of that kind of stuff.
And it doesn't matter, or does it, what platform they're using to edit, like DaVinci, Premiere, Final Cut? Does it matter because and how are they exporting out what you need? And can you talk us through a little bit about that too?
Sure, yeah. You can kind of edit on any platform you want. It's just going to change the workflow a little bit based on the kind of unique kind of quirks and buttons that are available in that program. But the things that usually get handed over by editorial to visual effects for visual effects to start their work, we will get plates, which is basically like if there's a visual effects shot of an empty room and we're supposed to stick a monster in it, we'll get that shot of the empty room, but only the length that's been used in the final edit of the film, so that we're not dealing with, massive amounts of footage and in a format that we can't deal with. So we'll have that transcoded to us as EXR files, which are 32-bit files that contain as much color information as we can. And we'll make sure that we're, staying in the same color space, same gamut and everything. We want to preserve as much kind of color information across the post pipeline as possible, so that once we get into the color grade, we still have all of that information to work with, and then we can kind of stretch that out and add contrast and change the colors and such. So the stuff that we're getting from editorial are the clips of VFX shots that are actually used in the final cut at those lengths. We typically will ask for 12-frame handles on each side, so that if the editor needs to kind of slide it around once the VFX kind of come back, they have the ability to do that. And we'll also get just a kind of quick time reference of the entire movie usually, or of that scene that contains the visual effects, time code burnt in, so that we can kind of take our plates and make sure that they sync up with the footage. And, if there's any temp VFX that the editor has put in, we can kind of take a look at that, make sure timing-wise we can align our VFX to that and stuff.
Oh, that's great. Can you provide examples of some challenging visual effect shots or sequences, you've worked on in projects? And maybe like a little bit of the do's and don'ts, when somebody's giving it to you, have you had something that maybe you're like, okay, please give us like it in this way? Or
Yeah, that's a good question. Each and every project has kind of challenges of its own. I I like to avoid the shows where the challenges are, oh, we didn't kind of see this coming, but those have certainly happened. It can be a case where what usually happens is a director or a producer or a production will not hire a VFX supervisor and will go into production without having that person on their team. And they'll have VFX in the script, and they'll maybe have a little bit of VFX experience in the past, just enough to be dangerous, and they'll shoot their VFX sequences and shots in a way that is not quite conducive to what we need. I think like the one that always crops up, that people think that they can kind of get away without a VFX supervisor, and then they traditionally kind of shoot this not wrong, but like in a way that's less than ideal, is screens. So you'll often go on set and you'll see like TVs that need screens added in post, and there'll be like really big kind of green markers all around the corners. If they're on the bezels, that can cause a huge problem because then we have to essentially kind of rebuild the bezels in post artificially. But even on top of that, like that bright green color and the quantity of it can cause light to bounce off of it and can cause like a little bit of a green glow to peek around the thing. Sometimes people will kind of play like a full kind of green image on the TV, like they'll pipe it through the TV itself. And then they'll also kind of add kind of really contrasty kind of red markers, which is unnecessary because we can just kind of track the corners of the screen. If there's a way for me to share a link somewhere at the end of this podcast, I can link you to like a little primer that I love to use on kind of the best practices for shooting screens for VFX. Because that's the one that I see the most is like, oh, we can cut costs by not hiring a VFX supervisor because it's just screens. And then we get screens that are harder to do than they ought to be.
Right. Can you walk me through a little bit? Because in the film that we were working on, somebody's popping out of a book, and I noticed, what you did to prepare for the scene to be shot. And is it important to have the visual effects artist on the shoot when you're doing the special effects part? Or probably would be wise to do that. I don't know if maybe budgetarily they can, but you want to talk on that?
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, on that project, I'm going to be the supervisor as well as the artist, so it kind of just made sense. But traditionally, you'll just have the supervisor on set, and they'll have kind of done their own research and development on all the visual effects that are coming up, and they'll have come up with a game plan of like, okay, this is how I'll want whatever studio I hire, whatever vendor I go out to, whatever artists I bring on. This is the data that we're going to collect on set. This is how we're going to shoot these VFX shots, and these are the kind of assembly instructions for them. Now, there's obviously like some wiggle room within that. There's kind of a plan set forth by the VFX supervisor because, as you said, budgetarily, it doesn't make sense to bring the entire VFX department on. I'm sure you've seen in the big tentpole movies, there's just a wall of VFX artists. To be honest, most of those people aren't even hired until post-production starts or is like already underway. Those people are not brought on until there's actual VFX work to do. Up until that point, it's primarily the VFX supervisor, shepherding the production through pre-production and principal photography.
And you put like little squares on the curtains. Can you talk about that? And also you had the color.
Yeah, the color chart.
Color chart, right.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I was doing on set to kind of gather data in the right way. I ended up actually not needing to put any markers on the curtains. I ended up putting a small couple of them on the TV for a couple of shots. But for the curtains, and this is a workflow that I really like to do, is I like to be highly collaborative with production design and wardrobe and camera to make sure that I don't need to be adding, ugly tape marks and things if there's another way that we can kind of design our set in a way that works for VFX. So in that instance, I worked with our production designer, Susano, to make sure that whatever curtains he was going to be putting up had a little bit of detail, had a little bit of contrast in it so that I could actually, isolate those points in post-production, track each of those, and recreate the motion of the camera, which is called match moving. And that's kind of the first step to most visual effects shots. So you want to make sure that, whatever you're filming on set can be match moved and it has enough kind of local detail for the computer to be able to pick up on that. So in that case, with the curtain, I made sure that Susano had some options that were nice and contrasty, had some dots, had some patterns that I could pick up on. Even the like side table lamp, the lampshade had some patterning and everything on that. And then with regards to the color chart, that's a tool developed, oh gosh, I want to say in the 50s. I mean, it's probably as old as color film. It was developed by Kodak, and I think the current one that we use is by a company called Macbeth or X-Rite. There's a couple different ones. But the purpose of that is basically that if you film that chart using all the different cameras that you're using on set to capture data. So for example, on the project that we just worked on together, we had our main cinema camera, which was an Arri Alexa. And then I also had a 360-degree camera that I use to take high dynamic range images. And so those are for capturing the lighting information of the set. And that helps me, put whatever CG objects under the set lighting digitally later on. So that's a different camera. And then I also had a stills camera, just a DSLR, a Sony A9, I believe. And so those are 3 different cameras. They have 3 different kind of sensors. They handle colors in a different way. They're going to all register the image in a slightly different way. So what the color checker allows us to do is it gives us the same reference. So if we film that color checker under all 3 cameras, and then we bring that into post, we can kind of align them, and we can make sure that the lighting information that I'm applying to the CG is the same as the lighting as it looks like through the Arri Alexa, and whatever lighting information or modeling or shading textures that I'm drawing from the stills camera is also the same colors that you would see through the Arri Alexa.
So your toolkit is to bring 2 different cameras, and then also you bring the color chart, right? You bring the color chart, and then what is it called when you do have to mark up like the television or anything you need to mark up? Is that just like gaffer tape? Like what tape do you use?
It can kind of be anything. Like we just generally, the umbrella term for those is tracking marks or adding tracking marks to something. But it can kind of be anything. It'll kind of vary case by case, but the kind of rule of thumb is, because ultimately a visual effects artist is going to need to paint those out of the final image if the VFX isn't already covering it up. And even if it is, sometimes it just makes more sense to kind of cover that up. So you want to find kind of like the smallest and least kind of obtrusive thing that's still visible to the camera through all the motion blur, through all the depth of field, and can be tracked, throughout the duration of the shot. That's kind of the goal, is to be as subtle as you can with whatever you're kind of trying to add to the set.
What skills and qualifications does one need to be a visual effects artist?
Yeah, there's not like a particular certification or track that leads into it. You'll see visual effects supervisors coming from various disciplines, from compositing to, CG, even technical directors. I would say it's important to kind of understand the general principles of photography and good image making, light, color composition, as well as the kind of unique visual side effects of cameras and of photography, because our job is to make artificial images look like they were real and filmed by a camera. So that's a very kind of like specific thing. And then it's also just important to have a general understanding of the VFX pipeline and kind of what each department needs in order to excel at their job. So in that respect, it does help if you've kind of done visual effects shots start to finish, instead of just kind of holding up in one narrow discipline at a large studio. So that curiosity about all aspects of VFX is super essential. But I think the most important thing, honestly, is the ability to communicate clearly, to work as part of a larger team, as well as to be able to lead a team of other artists that you bring on underneath you in post-production, and as well as your ability to understand the big picture of how visual effects is going to help tell the story, kind of underpins everything. So,
is there a name for somebody? Is it just the visual effects assistant? Is that like you really should work with visual effects artists and like as their assistant? Is that how it works to learn the trade?
It's interesting. The visual effects is one of the trades in our business that doesn't have a union. It doesn't have a guild. So there's not exactly like a codified kind of rank structure the way you would see in like a camera department or a lighting department that way. To become a visual effects supervisor, it requires, honestly, knowing somebody that needs a visual effects supervisor and is going to make a film, and that'll be your first gig as a visual effects supervisor, and you'll kind of go from there, basically.
So you really just have to jump in.
Yeah, you just kind of jump in. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my God, that's so great. So have you ever had any challenges, or what are the challenges that you face when working with directors and producers who may have limited experience with visual effects?
That's a great question. I think I mentioned before, kind of the biggest danger with inexperienced directors and producers is visual effects supervisors not being hired in pre-production and not being there on set, and then that leading to footage that is not conducive to visual effects, or that might be harder to create the visual effects for in a seamless way. I think another thing that I've seen that's kind of unique is directors who are getting into visual effects for the first time, who maybe have kind of a run and gun style, or maybe are used to kind of finding it on the day. They are not used to the volume of kind of questions and decisions that you have to make in pre-production about what something is going to look like, how you're going to film it, where you're going to film it from, how the edit is going to work. That can lead to them kind of changing the sequence, rewriting it, or just not allowing for enough time on set for visual effects to get the elements that they need.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked how you came in and were there to assess the situation. And also in pre-production, you came to the plate with a visual of what it could look like. And I thought that was really great. Is that something that people should do, like as a visual artist, is come up with that beforehand?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's a function of a lot of the work that I did with our director, Amy, in pre-production and the discussions that we had. We initially sat down over the script and we kind of talked about what she was visualizing. I came up with some ideas verbally, I came up with some sketches, and then I went home and generated like a very basic, what's called a pre-visualization. It's just kind of a basic kind of blocking out of what the visual effect is going to look like, so that we can start to make decisions about, okay, here's how the camera's going to move, here's the kind of performance that we're going to want, here's what the set maybe ought to look like, things like that. And so that's really helpful in just kind of determining logistics. Another thing that I'll also do is I'll just create mood boards, and those can be more useful in kind of nailing down a particular aesthetic in a way that animatics, those are meant to be kind of rough and dirty approximations of blocking and kind of what camera is doing, and they're more of a kind of blueprint tool, kind of like a screenplay is. Whereas the mood board is meant to get you aesthetically to like, oh, okay, this is what it's going to really look like. This is what it's going to feel like. Here's the emotion that it's going to evoke. So those are the two kind of tracks that I'll generally take as a supervisor in pre-production to make sure that we're on the same page as a crew and as a visual effects artist and a director going into the shoot.
I love it. So how do you stay up to date on all the latest advancements and trends in visual effects? I mean, do you like watch movies and go, oh, I want to do that?
I do, yeah. I mean, that's how I got into visual effects, honestly, is just being dazzled by all kinds of movies. I mean, The Matrix is probably the standout for me, Bullet Time. And, I used to devour the special features. I mean, I still do. They're not as detailed as they used to be, unfortunately. These days, I kind of supplant that with a lot of the behind the scenes kind of comes from me being a member of the Visual Effects Society. I get to vote on the Visual Effects Society Awards every year. And so I get to see visual effects breakdowns of, all the biggest movies, TV shows, and things like that. And I get to kind of learn about the newest kind of techniques and methods and programs that are being used there. The other kind of big kind of avenue for staying abreast of knowledge is the SIGGRAPH Computer Graphics Conference, which is an annual conference. It happens every other year in LA and every other year in Vancouver. And so whenever it's in LA, it was actually just in LA last month, I believe. It's basically a trade show for, all the visual effects vendors, programs, all of that kind of stuff, as well as, there's a whole host of new research being presented by scholars in computer graphics. So you really get to see what the kind of bleeding edge of the field is before it's even made it to the market. And that's a really great place to kind of see what's coming up on the horizon.
And do you spend a lot of money at these conferences?
I do, yeah. The good thing about SIGGRAPH is that most of the content that most of the speeches, the lectures, the demos will eventually find their way onto free channels like YouTube within a week after they're at SIGGRAPH. So you can really kind of consume a lot of SIGGRAPH content just by going on YouTube or Google and just Googling SIGGRAPH.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. So how would you describe the role during the post-production phase, including working with editors and colorists? Like, what's the next step once you're getting the product?
Yeah, so visual effects traditionally is kind of sandwiched between editorial and color. So the final visual effects on a show aren't done until a reel or a sequence, or even the whole show has been picture locked by editorial. On really big productions, there are going to be multiple phases of visualization. So there'll be pre-visualization in pre-production, which will kind of give departments an idea of, okay, how are we going to shoot this on set? But then in post-production, there's also post-visualization, which is, okay, now let's take the footage that we actually shot and let's create some, quick and dirty VFX so that when we're looking at the edit, when producers are looking at the edit, when execs and CEOs are looking at the edit, they have something to judge it on, and they're not just looking at empty shots. Because I'm sure you can imagine for big budget, visual effects blockbusters, so many sequences would just be nothing but green screen if there wasn't some kind of post-viz. And so that post-viz can kind of go throughout multiple iterations throughout editorial as the cut changes. And so on those kinds of shows, there's a lot of collaboration between editorial and visual effects. Once the picture is locked, footage is handed over to visual effects, and editing kind of takes on more of a kind of sort of like an assembly role. So like as visual effects kind of come back, they'll cut those into the picture. As any kind of changes come back, they'll cut those in. As sound comes in, they'll add the new sound to the picture, that kind of stuff, and get everything ready for color. So during the visual effects process, the visual effects supervisor's job is to essentially oversee the entire execution of the visual effects. So I'm translating all of the data that I've accumulated about how do I help, what is the director's vision for the story? What kind of aesthetic feel do these visual effects have? As well as all the technical things like, okay, how did we shoot this? What frames per second? How many takes? Do we have, clean plates? All of that stuff. What is the methodology of each particular sequence that I had in mind and how I shot each thing for the visual effects artist? And I'm communicating that down to my team and making sure that they know what they need to do. And then as they execute visual effects shots, I'm getting those back, cutting those into the overall show or sequence, and making sure that those work. They help tell the story, giving notes back to the artists to iterate on and make sure that we're kind of arriving at the same place, making sure all the visual effects is continuous and consistent. I'm kind of the liaison between the artists and the rest of production to make sure that whatever they need is what we're delivering.
What are some key considerations when creating visual effects when you need to interact with actors or practical sets? Like, have you done a lot where you've had to interact with actors within the scene?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of it. I would say the more data you can collect, which just kind of comes down to time and budget, the more easily you can kind of integrate the two. For actors specifically, it kind of depends on what the effect is. If the effect is interacting with them very, very closely, maybe even driving the visual effects, we'll want the actor's costume itself to be trackable. And so we'll work with wardrobe to make sure that there's some kind of patterning or something on their wardrobe that we can track. So the ideal in terms of a tracking pattern, the ideal for a visual effects artist to see in their plate is a black dot on a white background that is clearly visible throughout motion blur, depth of field. I think I mentioned this before. And so if the clothing is not able to kind of meet that, then we'll add kind of tracking marks. And then for really big kind of big shows where there might need to be a full body replacement of an actor, we'll get a 360-degree scan of them. And so we'll go to a particular facility that has like the rig made for that, and we'll get them in costume and everything, and we'll get that geometry in that model. And there's companies that kind of specialize in just doing that. And you take your actor there, you pay whatever the fee is, and they spit out all the kind of assets for you to disseminate to all of your artists and everything. And then, as I'm sure like on shows like Pirates of the Caribbean and everything, where it's like there's a full kind of CG replacement of a character, they'll wear kind of full body mocap suits. So,
have you done that?
I've not worked on shows like that, no.
Now, can you share any memorable moments or projects that you've been in that's been pretty rewarding?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a feature film that I supervised called Driver 113 a few years ago now. And we shot it in the desert out near Barstow, and it was a pretty low budget project. So it was just me, and the crew was me and 5 other guys who were all kind of friends from college. And the production rented an RV and drove us out there to an Airbnb that we literally had to off-road through 10 minutes of desert to get to this house. And we lived there for a week or two and just shot all around the desert and all around Barstow and these really kind of barren landscapes, deserted parts of towns, and just really liminal spaces. And so that was, the part of the magic of that movie was that it just kind of felt like a vacation. But the other magic of that movie was that the visual effects were so bespoke and so different from what I normally do. That film is all about a driver for a kind of a Google Maps service, and he encounters a surveillance conspiracy. And so a lot of that movie is told through kind of all the various cameras that are surrounding him and surveilling him. And a lot of my job kind of involved creating this very multifaceted look, a very patchwork kind of found footage feel, making you very aware that at all times you're watching something through a lens, kind of creating like a filter between the viewer and the audience to make them question, like, is this real, or is this the work of an unreliable narrator? So there's some really unique and imaginative effects shots in that movie that I'm really proud of. So, yeah.
That must be so rewarding, to working on things that you get to, expand your scope and do things that are different. And probably in your field, you're always doing something different. I'm curious about AI. Has AI affected what you do or helped in what you do to make things a little easier?
In certain ways, it's made certain things easier. I would say kind of at the lower end of the scale, where repeatability and reproducibility are desirable factors. Traditionally with visual effects, you're trying to come up with a look that you haven't really seen before, that's the kind of latest kind of trend-setting thing. So in terms of the high-level concept art phase, it can kind of come into play as soon as you start needing to kind of execute a whole sequence of shots that are continuous, that you have really fine-grained art directable control over. AI doesn't give you those controls. It doesn't really expose that. It's kind of a black box. And so you have a lot of prompts and you have a lot of kind of bells and whistles, but on the other side, you never know quite exactly what the image is going to look like. And that for a discipline as meticulous and as worried about individual pixels as visual effects can be, and you can bet that visual effects supervisors and directors and stuff are scrutinizing that, AI doesn't quite cut it yet. So for concept art, it can be a good kind of jumping off point. I think for rotoscoping, for kind of cutting people out of the shot to be able to put something behind them, it's pretty good at that because that's kind of building on years and years of kind of existing tech. But in terms of actually giving an artist an art directable tool that they can predictably create predictable results with at a fine-grained level of detail, it's not there yet.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm curious for the future and how that's gonna, especially with, making people their younger self, like in the latest Indiana Jones. Do you do that as well? Is that a part of visual effects, is making somebody look younger, or taking their younger self and putting it on their older self?
Yeah, that is absolutely a part of the visual effects department on a show like that. I haven't done de-aging to that extent. Like a sort of a related aspect is just sort of beauty fixes and kind of blemish removal, which you'll see on a lot of shows. Very, very invisible visual effects. You'll see on a lot of fashion commercials. It's almost required, which is essentially like a moving version of Photoshop. In terms of de-aging actors, yeah, that can absolutely be visual effects. And, I've seen a number of different kind of techniques being pioneered. I haven't looked at the breakdowns for Indiana Jones yet, but I'm curious to see kind of what the technology they used for that was.
So any tips you want to share to visual effects that want to become artists?
Yeah, I would just say stay curious. The subscription model that a lot of visual effects softwares have kind of adopted in the last 10, 15 years has its pros and its cons, but one of the pros is that it makes it accessible to more people. It makes these tools more accessible to more people. So there's never been a better time to just kind of like pay $20 for a month of After Effects and, just give it a spin and watch as many tutorials as you can. Having a love of VFX and having a desire to, just keep creating new stuff will drive you forward naturally.
Are there any visual effects networking groups around that meet monthly or on Facebook, or are you a part of any of those groups?
That's a great question. In the past, I was, but not too much anymore. Most of my groups now are kind of professional groups that kind of require you to be a working member of the industry. I mean, they do have kind of events that are more open to the public. So anything that you see regarding the Visual Effects Society that is public facing, any public facing events that they do, that's a good one to, you know, try and meet folks that are working in the industry and just start meeting people. You know, it's hard to say. It's hard to say because visual effects people can be so solitary and so kind of like locked in front of their computers. As I mentioned, like SIGGRAPH, if you can figure out like a way to get one of, you know, like if you can game your way into one of the kind of cheaper passes or something like that, that's another one that you can kind of, they always have a like a job fair corner where you can kind of meet recruiters and talk to recruiters. But LinkedIn is another good one. Just start Googling recruiter for X visual effects company, that visual effects company, this visual effects company, and just start striking up conversations and see what events they might have, things like that. That's kind of the way into a bigger studios through those recruiters.
Any projects you want to share about?
Yeah, I mean, the current project that we actually worked on together, it's I would say it's like a magical realist kind of fairy tale. It's a short film about a young girl who is there for the return of Harriet Tubman in a very kind of turbulent time in our recent past. And so I was the visual effects supervisor on that, and that I think just finished principal photography, and it's just kind of going into post-production now. So my work on that is ongoing, and we'll see. I think we're looking at a finish line somewhere near December or January. But we'll see kind of how that goes. But that's what I have on my plate at the moment. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And then you're also a screenwriter. Any scripts you're working on? Or
yeah, I'm working on a screenplay actually that's sort of a semi-autobiographical story of sort of my experience and my family's experience growing up in Northern California, kind of right around the events of 9/11, and kind of how that changed the way, you know, changed our lives essentially, and kind of changed the way we were treated and you know, my upbringing and my identity and all of that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of screenplay that's in the works right now.
Is that going to be a feature, short film?
That's a feature film, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on all your projects and stuff. And it's I can't wait to see where they go.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
And thanks again for being on the show today.
Yeah, my pleasure. I had a great time.
Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to get out there and make a film. Reach out to your local filmmakers group to get involved and connect. Please subscribe to the show if you like it, and follow me on Instagram @TammyMcGarrow. Until we meet again, what's your story?